I just checked the internet and there's approximately 87 billion fly patterns for sale. Wait, my browser just updated. That's 89 billion fly patterns for sale. You get it. There's tons of flies out there. So how do you make the best fly choice for your given fishing situation? Well, your best bet is to learn how to match the fake flies in your box to the real-life bugs that fish are actually eating. Now, that might sound like a lot, but it's honestly a pretty simple process. So today on Untangled, we'll walk you through the tried and true tactics for picking a fly that, if you present it well, the fish will have a hard time ignoring. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled and I am your host, Spencer Durant. Before we get into the show today, I want to give a very special shout out to 11-year-old Jackson from Maryland. He is a regular listener to Untangled. He loves fishing and he's caught a much bigger rainbow trout than his dad's ever caught, and he does not let his dad live that down. But unfortunately, Jackson's going through some pretty tough stuff right now. He's found out that he's got a recurrence of cancer, and obviously, that's never the news you want to hear, especially at 11. Man, so Jackson, we're pulling for you. You're in my thoughts and prayers. All of us at VFC are pulling for you, and we are excited for when you beat this thing, you get out on the water, and see just how much bigger of a fish you can catch. Again, go out there and show your dad up one more time. So we feel for you, Jackson, and you're in our thoughts and our prayers. Now, on to the main part of the show. If you're a regular listener to Untangled, just like Jackson is, you're not going to be surprised at all when you hear me say that I think people make far too big of a mountain out of the molehill that is fly choice. It just turns into this unnecessarily complex procedure that stymies a lot of anglers. That really frustrates your progression as an angler. And I get it. It feels impossible, especially if you're new to the sport. You haven't been doing it very long. You go into a fly shop or you look for flies online. There's a million of them for sale. And then if you even ask anybody in the fly shop or you ask somebody on the river or your fishing buddy, hey, what should I use? You're going to hear about fly patterns you never even knew existed. So that just adds more and more to your plate, more information that you don't necessarily know what to do with. Then, as if that's not enough, then you got to pair all of the informations about fly pattern with all the different hatches that you hear about. Your Hendricksons, your blue quills, your BWOs, your PMDs, your Drakes. Wasn't he a pirate anyways? And I think you end up where a lot of anglers do. They end up in sort of this messy middle in their progression as anglers. You get out often, you're on the water often enough, but not as much as you'd like. And you know how to tell a mayfly apart from a caddis, but the intricacies of each hatch really kind of escape you. So you end up just falling back on this cadre of flies that they seem to produce regularly enough for you that you catch a few fish, but you always feel like you're leaving something on the table. I think that's the messy middle where a lot of us end up. Or you're like me when I started fly fishing and you just pick a fly out of your box. It looks interesting. You tie it on, you fish it incorrectly all day long. And then you swear that you are never going to fly fish again because the guy next to you didn't stop putting fish in the net all day. And that's really where I want to focus on today is getting out from that feeling of just muddling through fly selection where we don't feel like we're making a choice with enough information, and into that spot where we can really feel confident about our choices, especially we're getting into spring, the bugs are going to start waking up, we're going to have great hatches to fish. We want to be ready to go when that time comes. And then just a heads up, everything that we're going to cover today is also in our rightfly ebook. It's just this complete guide to picking the right fly. And it's free too. So if you want another reminder, you want all this information in a PDF that you can just flip through on your phone, in addition to, re-listening to this podcast, if that's going to help you out too. I will throw a link to that ebook down in the show notes, or there's a QR code here on the screen you can scan as well if you're watching the video podcast. So let's start out the very beginning of fly selection with the broadest of broad strokes. Trout mostly eat aquatic insects, and that's just bugs that live, grow, and lay their eggs in the water. Now, as an adult, these insects are going to fly up above the water, near the water, but they don't bite. They might look like mosquitoes, but they're friendly. Your mayflies, your stoneflies, especially the stoneflies, they're going to look a little scary. They're actually friendly. So don't start squashing them. We want as many stoneflies out there as we can get. Now, I highly recommend learning as much as you possibly can about the groups of aquatic insects that fish eat. That's going to be your midges, your mayflies, your caddis, your stoneflies, terrestrial insects like grasshoppers, beetles, and ants, and then the other freshwater bugs like scuds, sow bugs, crawdads, worms. Learn as much as you can about all of those different types of critters that fish eat, because the more you learn about the bugs, the better angler you're going to be. The more you know about what fish eat, the better you can imitate it, the better you can fool fish into thinking that your fly is actually the real thing. Now, that's a lifelong commitment. It's not something that we can just cover in one episode of a podcast. That's why there's so many different episodes. There's so many different times we come back to this, because it's something we continually need to build on. It's something we need to continually learn and continually add to our own knowledge base. And just to illustrate this, there's the difference in blue-winged olives regionally is pretty stark. And that's a type of mayfly. So it's a type of smaller aquatic insect that a lot of fish eat. Blue-winged olives hatch all across the country. So whether you're fishing on the West Coast, Midwest, East Coast, blue-winged olives more than likely will hatch at some point on your rivers. And regionally, they can be hugely different. Okay, where I live, they're so dark. The bodies are so dark, they're almost black. Now, back down in Utah, where I grew up, where VFC is headquartered, a lot of the rivers around there, the blue-winged olives have that very light olive-colored body. So they're much more traditionally, they look more traditionally colored than the ones up in my neck of the woods. Same mayfly, same small, dark little Baetis mayfly that's coming off, but huge difference in appearance. And that's something that, again, I've just learned since I moved up here. That's just one example of how continually learning and observing and paying attention to what's going on around you in the water, you will not stop adding to that knowledge base. And that's just one example off the top of my head I can pull of how I keep learning new things about these bugs all the time. So it is a lifelong commitment, but we do have some other resources to help you out with that. We've actually got a free masterclass all about fly selection that goes into a lot of detail on your mayflies, your midges, your caddis, your stoneflies, your terrestrials, all the other freshwater bugs. Again, that's free, just on YouTube. I'll throw a link to that in the show notes if anyone wants to go check it out as well. But as you learn about these insects that are prevalent, especially the ones that are prevalent in your area, you also need to hone two simple skills that are going to continue to help you, whether you've been fly fishing for 20 years or you've just started. And these are the two things that this is what's going to carry you out of that murky middle that we talked about to open the show, where you don't really know what you're doing, and then you just fall back on, I'll use a rainbow warrior and a zebra midge because they work. Not using them because you know why they work, not using them because you understand why they work, just using them because they have. And as we know, you really want to progress, you really want to become a great angler. Understanding the why is so important, and that's the whole point of what we do here is helping you understand the why so you can go out and live real life. But anyways, you've got two skills. They're going to help you no matter how long you've been fly fishing. And the first one is you got to learn the rightfly formula. And this is just the method that we use to pick a fly. It's how we teach folks to pick flies here at VFC. Even if you don't know anything at all about aquatic insects, the rightfly formula is going to come in clutch. So if I say caddis and midge, and you're like, Durant, slow down. I have no clue what that is. Is that a tax bracket? Is that like a country in the Mideast that I'm not aware of? No, it's none of those things. It's a type of bug. It's food for the fish. If you don't know what those are, It doesn't matter. Okay. The right fly formula will still help you match the hatch. Now, obviously, learn about those as much as you can. It's going to improve your skill set, but for the purposes of learning about what fly to use and when and why, you don't have to know all of that quite yet. And honestly, there's plenty of times when I still fall back on using the right fly formula myself, and I'll share an example of that in a minute. But the right fly formula, what it tells you to do is as you get to the river, you want to observe for a minute. Don't just start fishing. Don't rig up. Just watch. Okay? Take a look and see if there's any bugs buzzing in the air. Are there any bugs on the water's surface at all? If there are, try and get a close look at them. Try and observe them. If there's bugs buzzing in the air, you can take your hat off and you can swing it around in the air and you'll grab a couple of them that way. And then you can look at them. You know, are they long and skinny? Are they short and fat? Are they kind of in between that? You know, how many legs do they have? What color are they? You can start observing some things about them. If there's no fish in the air no fish in the air, I sure hope there's not fish in the air where you're at. If there's no flies in the air and there's not any on the water surface, that's when you can start turning over some rocks. Okay, look and see what's actually in the water at that point. And you're going to do the same thing. You're going to observe the bugs. And once you have an idea of what's in, on, or around the water, that's all stuff that fish can eat. That's all food that's available to them. So at that point, what you're going to want to do is pop open your fly box, and you are going to try and pick flies out of your box that match the real life bugs that you observed based on their size, the shape, and the color. And those are listed in order of importance. So you pop open your box, and let's say you found, I'll know it's a mayfly nymph because I know how to tell my mayfly nymphs apart, but you find something that's not really small, but not really big. It's kind of a medium-sized looking little bug. It's got two tails. It's got 3 legs up close to the head and kind of little pincher looking legs going on. And it's really dark brown, almost black. Okay. You find a bunch of those. You think, oh, that looks like something fish is going to eat. Then you're going to look in your fly box and you want to find something that's the right size first. And once you find a fly that's the right size, then you want to find one that's the right shape. Okay. If the little bug that you found is short and fat, you want a short and fat fly. If the little bug you found is longer and skinnier, you want a longer and skinnier fly. Those are the 2 most important things. If you can nail the size and the shape, you're going to be in great shape to catch some fish. If you have an exact color match, that's awesome. Color matters, but it's not hugely important. That's why it's the last thing on the list in the right fly formula. Just pick a color that's as close to the real thing as possible. That doesn't need to be an exact match, but your size and your shape need to be as close as you can possibly get them. And then once you've done that, you can tie those flies on knowing that you are putting a fly out there that looks like what is in, on, or around the water. It's something that the fish can go ahead and eat and feel confident in eating. And it's something you, as an angler, can feel confident in doing because you've used your observational skills. You've followed the right fly formula. This is going to help you pick out a fly. Again, even if you don't know anything, you can't tell that that's a mayfly nymph versus a caddis nymph. Okay, at that point. And just to bring it back to how I still fall back on the right fly formula myself, even though, yeah, I've been doing this long enough. I can tell my caddis nymphs apart from my mayfly nymphs. I can understand all of that stuff. I was out fishing a while ago and there were tons of bugs on the water, but we were floating in a drift boat and I couldn't get a super close look at what was on the water because we weren't really stopping. We were just cruising through and I couldn't really tell if they were midges, if they were mayflies. I didn't get a clear look at what they were. All I knew is they were really small and they were really light colored. So I just tied on a size 20 Comparadun with a cream colored body and fish ate on like the first or second cast with the drift of that fly. Again, just because I was able to match size, shape, color, boom, I did it. And that was without as much analysis as I probably should have done. I probably should have, bent down in the water, tried to grab a couple of them, tried to really look at them. But it's like, I think I know what that might be. And grabbed a fly out of the box that matched it. And I do that fairly consistently where I don't I will still fall back on those principles of matching size and shape and just trying to match what I see the fish actually eating. So that is your first tip. You want to get out of that murky middle of your progression as an angler. Yes, learn the flies. That is going to level you up more than anything. But in the interim, master that right fly formula, and it is going to pay dividends for you out on the water. The second thing that you need to do if you want to make fly selection something that doesn't give you heartburn, something that doesn't cause you the same angst as going to your mother-in-law's for any reason at all, even if she's making food. This might sound a little counterintuitive, so let me explain it first, but whatever you do, don't buy too many flies. Now, what I mean by that is you don't need 1,000 different patterns themselves. And before you ask, yes, I legitimately know anglers who have that many flies in their boxes and carry them with them to the river every single time they go fishing. They'll have 10, 12, 15 boxes of flies all the time, every day out on the water. And just to be completely clear, I am talking about entirely different patterns. So, an example that would be you'd have parachute Adams, irregular Adams, an irresistible Adams, 8 different types of green drakes. That's where it starts to become too much, in my opinion. I am a huge advocate of owning a lot of flies that are the same pattern but in multiple sizes. So in my box right now, I've got a parachute Adams in sizes 12 all the way down to 22 because that parachute Adams is so versatile. It can work in a bunch of different mayfly hatches. The bigger ones can sometimes pull double duty in a stonefly hatch if you really need them to. I've even seen them work during caddis hatches. It's just a very effective, very useful fly to have in all those different sizes. The really tiny ones could be midges sometimes. Fish will eat them during a midge hatch for whatever reason. So I have a lot of those, but I don't have a huge variety of actual patterns. I have a lot of variety in size because as we learn with that right fly formula, size is incredibly important. So that wide variety, that wide range of sizes is going to help me match the hatch way more effectively than a billion different patterns, especially because I'll buy them and then I'll forget I'll even have it, right? And then just to illustrate this point even more, let me tell you a little story. I think it was a year or so ago. I was out on this famous tailwater, and it's very well known for its absolutely ridiculous blue-winged olive hatch. And we were the guide. Alex and I were out with a guide. We'd never fished with this guide before. And I usually do defer to the guides on rivers. They're on the water more than I am. They know it. I'm not going to question them. And he tied on, even though I know this river well, I still wasn't going to question him. And the guide tied on all these different types of blue-winged olives. He had so many different BWO patterns, and none of them really worked. We weren't consistently getting fish. I was getting a lot of refusals. So eventually, after like the 4th or 5th rejection, I just cut it off. I cut off his. I said, here, I'm going to try something. And I put on a size 16 crippled mayfly that I love to tie for these really picky hatches. And between that and a purple haze, we caught all our fish on it the rest of the day. We were consistently into fish at that point. It's just good, reliable flies. I know them well. They were sized appropriately for the hatch that we were fishing, and they worked a lot better than the flies that our guide had that were highly imitated, that were super specialized, that, I'm sure they work, but they weren't working all that well that day. And part of why I think the flies that I picked worked is because there's a lot to be said for fishing flies you believe in, because when you fish a fly you feel good about, you fish it a lot better than a fly that you're a little on the fence about. Okay. And I don't know that I was doubting the guide. I wouldn't say that, but after like the 4th or 5th rejection, I knew my presentation was good. I knew my leader was sized right. I knew I was doing as much as I possibly could to get the fish to eat. And after the 4th or 5th rejection with one of those flies, I finally said, let me try this. I know this one works. And we just kept those on all day. And we did have to tweak presentation a little bit with that cripple and the purple haze, but that's all we used all day. And up to that point, we'd switched flies like 7, 8, maybe even 9 times. We switched flies a ton. So just going back to the old reliable stuff, focusing on a great presentation really paid off in that super picky hatch. And then the other part is, I touched on this a little bit, but why I recommend against having so many flies is that you can almost run into a little bit of paralysis by analysis when you have a million different patterns in your box. Because you can sit there and you can debate between patterns for so long that you end up missing most of the hatch because you can't decide which fly to tie on. And I've been there. I missed most of a really great midge hatch a few years ago because I had all these new little midge patterns. I wanted to try them out and I couldn't decide which one I wanted. And then eventually I realized that I'd missed like a half hour's worth of the hatch because I couldn't make up my dadgum mind. So that, again, that's why I advocate against too many. But then I also think if you take a step back, how many different patterns do you actually catch fish on throughout the year? Answer that question for yourself real quick. Probably not very many. I have about 24 different patterns that I use consistently throughout the year. Now, if I'm going lake fishing or I'm chucking streamers, we'll add some more to the mix. But my tried and true, which is what I use most of the time, about 24 different patterns. And for a lot of us, I'm sure that's probably going to be pretty true, where you're going to come down to that core, maybe 2 to 3 dozen different patterns that you use year round, and that's about it. So that's the case, then why would you have hundreds of dozens of different flies in your boxes of different patterns, right? If you're consistently catching fish on those ones, then just focus on getting a good presentation with the flies that work instead of stacking your boxes with millions of different patterns that you're going to forget about and then are just going to confuse you when you go to the point of fishing, getting into a great hatch and needing to rig up quickly. Then you see all these different options and you run into that paralysis by analysis, okay? So let's bring this all back together. Tie this all in a nice little bow here to wrap us up. Learn as much as you can about aquatic insects. That is the best way to improve your fly selection and get to the point where you don't feel like you're just guessing because it's this time of year, mayflies are coming off, and I know on my local river, that means blue-winged olives. Or if you're out east, that means Quill Gordon, or later on Hendrickson's, right? Understand when they hatch, where they hatch, and what's regionally going on for you. Understand that part. There's no shortcut to that. It's not that hard. It takes time, a little bit of memorization, but there's no shortcut for it. However, you still need to be able to use the rightfly formula effectively, even when you know what's hatching, because you still need to be able to match size, shape, and color if you want to get the fish to eat. And the rightfly formula is a great bridge while you're learning flies. You can still fall back on those principles to pick a fly, even if you're not sure, like, is that a caddis? Is that a drake? I'm having a hard time telling those apart. Fall back on that rightfly formula. You're going to be in good shape. Okay, so figure that out. And then don't haul around too many flies. Have a lot of variety in size. Don't worry about having too many sizes, but don't waste a ton of money on a bunch of random different patterns that you're probably honestly never going to use. I mean, and that's why our premier collection of flies that we sell here at VFC, it's like 122 flies is what it comes with. There's 48 different patterns. And there's enough variety in there that you can dial in what works really well on your water, and then you buy more of those. But you don't suffer from that paralysis by analysis because there's so many different ones, you can't really figure it out. And just, if you want to take a look at our fly collections, you can do that. I'll throw a link down in the show notes, or you can go to vfc.media/flies, and you can grab some fly collections there. But hopefully that clears up some of the stuff about fly selection, gave you all something to think about. If you got any more questions, any feedback about the fly selection process, please let me know. Drop a comment. Let us know in school somewhere. And I'd be happy to answer any follow-ups or, do another show on the same topic and go deeper on another aspect of it. So appreciate it. But it is time to wrap up this part of the show and move on to the Q&A portion of this week's episode. because every week here at Untangled, we spend half the show directly answering questions from listeners and viewers just like yourself. So if you've got a fly fishing question that you would like answered, you can go ahead and send those on into us. There's a link to do that down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. Hank from Colorado's got our first question, writes in and says, how do I get in on this fly tying night? Hank, that's a great question, and he's referring to the tying night that we host every month in school, which I think I mentioned this on a few podcasts now, but for those who don't know, school's just this newer social media platform, and it's basically like joining a Facebook group, except it doesn't suck because it's not Facebook. There's no political memes. There's no vague crap posting from your Aunt Karen about why your mom's meatloaf sucks. Just a bunch of anglers, talk shop, swap stories, we share tips. And then when you join our group, and it's completely free to join, free to sign up for all this stuff, you'll also be part of, I think we've got 5,000 members now, probably well past 5,000 at this point, all across the world. So you can talk to anglers from everywhere. We got a lot of European anglers in there. It's been really fun to watch the community grow. And then Alex and I, we spend time in school every day. So you can, message us, you can comment on our stuff, we can comment on your stuff. It's a great way to connect with, the rest of VFC. And then the cherry on top is we do a monthly deep dive where we take one topic and, as the name implies, we go super deep on it. So it's almost like a little training where we talk about, it's March. So February's deep dive was about finding places to fish. And I forget what exactly January's was on because I've got a million things running through my head at this point. But there'll be topics like that, finding places to fish, rigs, different aquatic insect species. We'll do a deep dive on those. And that happens once a month. And then tying night happens once a month. And that's where we literally just sit down and Alex walks you through tying a different pattern. And we'll have the tying kits available. So you can order them and tie along with Alex, tie up the flies that he's doing. February was the Frenchie. January was the zebra midge. I'm not exactly sure which one we're doing for March yet. I think Alex has decided, but I forgot to ask him before I did the show today. And then, we just sit down, we tie the pattern, we talk about flies for like an hour. It's tying night. It's really laid back. But during tying night and the deep dive, you do have the opportunity to ask us questions. We get to sit and, talk live to you. And they are live, but if you can't make the time and the night when we do those events, we also record them and then post them only in school for people to go ahead and review and watch as well. So definitely a lot of perks to being in school. And, again, it's free. So you get to just have all of those opportunities to interact, talk with people, learn and grow in this sport. Basically, it's a place to live real life when you're not able to go on the water, is what it boils down to. I'm not exactly sure when the next tying night is going to be exactly. It's probably going to be sometime the week of March 24th. Alex is in charge of scheduling those. I just show up when he tells me to. So he says, be here. And I say, okay. But it'll probably be sometime the week of March 24th. Now, if you go join school, it will be on the calendar, so you can RSVP, add it to your own calendar, and be ready to go. But I'll throw a link to join school down in the show notes or on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. Good question, Hank. Thanks for sending it in. Christian from Utah has our next question, writes in and says, hey guys, I want to know how you approach fishing pressured water. Years ago, I vowed I'd never fish the middle or lower sections of the Provo River ever again. I got so sick of all the pressure and dealing with questionable behavior from inexperienced anglers, high-holing, walking through reds, allowing their dogs to swim in the pool just upriver of me, etc. That said, I recently got into Euro nymphing and figured that method, plus all the years of experience I've gained since, might actually give me a bit of an advantage on the Provo. I've decided to revisit that river. It's been a very mild winter here in Utah, so I've been out a fair bit on both sections, and I'm very underwhelmed with the success I've seen. I pulled a handful out of the lower and absolutely nothing out of the middle. I only fish weekdays, and still I can tell that the trout are just wary on those stretches. How do you go about fishing these heavily pressured waters? Do you just lower your expectations and accept that it's going to be slow? Or do you have some tricks to perhaps outsmart a few other anglers and appeal to the trout in a unique way? I'd love to know if I could tighten up my game a little instead of just accepting defeat and driving further out to get off the beaten path. Thanks, gents. Christian, this is a really good question. Appreciate the detail you gave and the time you took in sending it in. And right off the bat, I'll tell you, this winter has been really weird in most of the West. And the fishing's been really weird for me too. I've had 2 lights out days, and then most of the rest of the winter has been pretty slow. The weather, all the warmth, it's really messing with things in a lot of ways. So I wouldn't hang my hat on the pressure being the number one reason that you're seeing tough days, especially on those rivers, because I do think the winter's playing part of a role in it. Now, that being said, yes, they're pressured, and with the weather being this nice, there's a lot more people out fishing this time of year as well. So, highly pressured rivers they're really where some of the things that we talk about on Untangled kind of get thrown out the window. Okay? And by that I mean, usually we talk about fly choice, obviously for the first half of this show. Usually fly choice does not matter near as much as presentation. A presentation matters the most. If you can get that fly in front of the fish and make it look real, it does not have to be an exact carbon copy of what they're eating. It needs to be a reasonable food item for that time of year, but it doesn't need to be exactly what they're eating in most cases. For most fish, in most fisheries, if you get a decent drift with a decent fly that's a good match for what they're eating, fish are usually going to eat it. Now, when you run into a highly pressured river, there's tons of anglers. They see lots of fake flies every single day of their lives. The fish wise up pretty quickly. So not only do they want a perfect drift, they're a lot less forgiving about mistakes in your presentation. They're also pretty discerning about fly choice. So these are the situations where, yes, it really does pay to have the exact right fly on. For me personally, when I'm fishing pressured water, I really like to have as many different sizes of flies on hand as possible, because usually the go-to, especially on highly pressured tailwaters, is to fish tiny flies. So sometimes you'll need to fish an 18 instead of a 16, or a 22 instead of a 20 that you'd fish normally. I mean, shoot, there's one fisher in Colorado. It's super famous for size 26, even size 28 midges on like 7X tippet being the norm. That's just what people use there because the water's so clear, it's so slow moving, the fish see everything, and the river is located close enough to the Denver metro area that literally everybody goes to fish it. So they get very discerning about flies at that point. Now, on fisheries where everybody does go tiny, it can sometimes pay off to go a little bit larger, kind of unmatch the hatch a little bit. Give you an example of that. I was out on one of the pickier tailwaters here in the West. This was 10, 12 years. It was a long time ago. And actually, it was the day I met my buddy Ryan Kelly, Green River Fly Fisher on Instagram, one of the fishiest guys I know. And I think he was still guiding at the time. He doesn't guide anymore, but I think he was still guiding then. And anyways, I was out fishing. He was out taking pictures. He runs into me. It's a big snowstorm. I was the only person out there. And I was complaining to him that I couldn't catch this fish. I didn't know who he was at the time. He was just some guy taking pictures. But there was this big rainbow I could see upstream of me, and I couldn't get it to look at my flies. I was complaining, and he's like, well, what are you using? And I had on some like size 18 something or other. And he just shakes his head. He's like, nah, I don't want that small stuff. Use this. And he picks a size 12 pheasant tail out of my box. I'm like, are you sure about this? Meanwhile, not knowing that I'm talking to the guy who is one of the best guides on the Green River when he was guiding. There are very few people on the planet who know that river as well as Ryan does. Anyways, I first cast with that fly, caught that fish, and it was like a 20-inch rainbow. So it's always worth just sizing up every now and then. If the fish are turning their noses up at your offering, size up. Keep the same fly, but just go a larger size. See if that does the trick for you. But again, what really is going to make the most difference on pressured water, your fly choice matters a ton. You really need to dial into what they're eating, but you still have to get that presentation down. You've got to get those flies to look as lifelike and as real as possible. And in case of the two rivers that you mentioned, the big key there is getting them to stay in the strike zone for as long as possible, because most of the fishing on those rivers is nymphing. That's why Euro nymphing is so popular there, because there are some good dry fly hatches, but there's so much food subsurface. The fish really key in on that stuff. You know, the reason that a lot of people use the bounce rig, you might hear the Provo River bounce rig referred to out there. The reason so many anglers use that is because it gets the flies into the strike zone quickly, keeps them there for a very long time, but then their flies are still drifting fairly naturally as well with that rig. So that's one reason why, you know, that rig's so popular there. That being said, when I lived in that area of Utah and I fished that river all the time, I never used a bounce rig. In fact, I never used a bounce rig on the Provo. I would just fish dry dropper rigs most of the time, and I'd fish small midges, little sow bugs, under an Adams, and I did just fine. So to me, that it really goes back to the whole point of even on heavily pressured waters, presentation is going to be the big key. You've got to get a great drift. That means you've got to eliminate drag. You got to get your flies into the strike zone, keep them there as long as possible. So focus on those skills, really focus on developing them. And that's when you're going to see the improvement in your catch rate on both of those rivers. And then just making sure you're fishing the right kind of water. Again, remembering that it's winter, they're in the slow, deep stuff. Focus your efforts there. Hopefully that helps. I appreciate you sending the question on in. Thanks. Roman from California has our next question, writes in and says, I was winter fly fishing a new stretch of a Northern California river for the first time. I quickly found one deep, slow hole, set up a jig worm and a jig egg under an indicator, and landed a fish within minutes. I then explored about a mile of river, adjusted depth constantly, and fished the same rig, but didn't get a single touch anywhere else. When I returned to that original hole, I landed several more fish, and every time I came back, that same spot produced again. I ended up netting 8 fish, so it was definitely a great day, but I got all of them in that exact same spot. I had a similar experience the week before, when I caught 5 total, but 4 within 10 minutes in the same hole. My question is it normal in winter for almost all the fish in a stretch to be concentrated in one prime holding hole, or should I have changed something to unlock other water? Does that mean to cover as much water as possible until you find them and then fish the heck out of that hole? Thanks for all the amazing content, especially the Winter Masterclass lately. It really helped me get started during these colder months. Tight lines and keep up the amazing work. Roman, thank you so much for the kind words, and thank you for the very detailed question. It's great to be able to dig into this and really give you some specific feedback. So, broadly speaking, in my experience, it's very common. Okay, fish in the winter, they want to find the deepest, slowest water they can. They want to stay there because trout in the winter, they're not really hibernating, but they kind of act like they're hibernating in some ways. They want to be where they don't have to spend hardly any energy at all and where they can still have access to food because their metabolism slows down and then the food factory of the river slows down. There are not very many bugs active in the winter compared to the summer. There's less for the fish to eat, so they have to conserve energy. That means, again, slow, deep water where they have access to food. That's where they're going to hang out. And that means pools are going to be the favorite place to look for them in a river because the current's slow, there's food, and the pools are often deep enough that it gives them some protection from overhead predators like birds and whatnot. So it's really the best of everything. Everything a fish could want, pools have it in the wintertime. And what that means for some rivers is that the fish are going to end up just congregated in a few small stretches of the entire river. Because when the water drops, or water levels drop during the winter, we have the least amount of water flowing through it in the winter. And it actually is going to decrease the amount of places a fish can hang out when that water gets so low. Okay, the run that you love to fish that's deep in the summer can end up being just a trickle during the winter. So there's nowhere for the fish to hang out there. especially if you're fishing on rivers that are fed primarily by snowmelt and rain. They're not under a lake or influenced by springs. That's when you're going to see big changes in water level throughout the year. One river in particular that I love to fish does this. During the summer, you find a lot of the fish tight to the banks, in the undercut, beneath the willows, on the depth changes, in the seams downstream of the islands. They'll be all over, and you really want to target all of those places because there's so much different holding water they can hang out in, and you can just target that kind of water all day long and be very successful. But in the winter, there's not a lot of water in those places, if any at all. There's also not very much food in those places, and then the water drops, so the fish all end up concentrated in just a few holes. So you'll find one deep spot on this river, and you'll fish it hard, you'll catch a bunch, and then you'll end up skipping a mile or two a river before you find another good spot. And it can feel like you're wasting a little bit of opportunity on that water, but I've just learned on this river through trial and error that the fish just aren't in those other spots during winter. They're concentrated in a few different areas, and you have to work the water until you find them. Okay. So it sounds like your local river is very similar. So short answer is yes. Look for the deep stuff. Look for the slow water. Fish it hard. And in the winter, don't feel like you're not fishing hard or not doing a good enough job if you're skipping a lot of water, because the trout just aren't going to be in that marginal stuff. They're going to be in the water where they can get what they want during the winter, which is that slow, deep stuff. So hopefully that answers your question. Appreciate you sending it in. Kevin from California has our next question, writes in and says, "Hey, Spencer, first off, I just want to say thanks to you and everyone at Ventures Fly Co. Your content has genuinely helped me become a better, more thoughtful fly fisher. From a purely technical standpoint, what's a fishing habit or decision you see even experienced anglers get wrong most often? Something subtle like fly selection, drift management, or reading water that consistently costs them fish, and how did you personally have to relearn that lesson? Untangled has been an absolute game changer for me in tight lines." Kevin, good question. Always great to hear from you, man. Kevin is super active in school, so if you go join the school group, you will meet Kevin very shortly, and he's a great dude, great guy in the school group. I thought a long time about your question, Kevin. Gave me a lot to think about. And I think it really just comes down to impatience. I think that's the biggest flaw. And I say that because that's definitely my biggest flaw as an angler. And I would say it's probably the biggest flaw I see in new anglers too. Yes, there's the casting and the fly selection and all that stuff, but I think everything can actually be tied back to impatience. Okay, let me give you two examples. I spend a lot of time out on the water, and I'm lucky to get to see a lot of different places. Very, very lucky, very blessed. And one situation that I've watched play out, whether it's in Utah or Alaska or anywhere in between, is you got a client out with a guide. The client's newer to fishing, haven't done it very much, might even be their first time. They're out there with the guide. The guide's walking them through how to fish a piece of water, giving very clear instructions. The guide's doing a great job. And the client, to their credit, they're listening, they're making the casts, they're doing it well, but only for a couple of minutes. When they don't get a fish after 5, maybe stretch it out to 10 minutes, they often look at the guide and they'll say something to the effect of, "Do you think we have the right fly on?" And the guide, to their credit, is going to say, "Yep, we do. I caught fish on this yesterday or last week or whenever they most recently caught fish on it." The client's going to kind of shrug, and then a few minutes later a few minutes go by, no more fish have been caught, and they'll say, "I don't know." Or they'll say, I don't think we would have caught, I don't think there's fish here. We would have caught them by now. They'll start, again, being impatient, not willing to work the water the way that you have to sometimes. I find myself saying that all the time, and it's something that I've tried to stop. Specifically that I don't think there's fish here. If there were, we would have caught them by now. I was super guilty of that for a long stinking time. I'm really making an effort to not be that way anymore. In fact, Alex and I just fished together last week, and we went to our favorite river that we love to fish together. There's this little shelf that we'd been eyeing for a long time. We actually floated past it a while ago, and we didn't have the time to stop and fish it in the boat, so we had to keep going. So we ended up, it was a long drive to get there, but we figured out how to get there. We got down to this little shelf, and we wanted to work it. We wanted to figure this thing out. And Alex fished the high end. I fished the low end of the shelf. He ends up hooking up first, caught a decent little rainbow. And then I caught one or two whitefish not long after Alex caught his. And then he ended up moving to the opposite side of the river. He found a place that he could cross and he could fish the other side of the shelf, just get a different angle on the presentations. And while he did that, I kept moving up and fishing my side of the river. And I started doing pretty well. I caught a bunch of whitefish. Alex missed a few more. He landed one whitefish on his side of the river. And I think we probably spent an hour and a half, 2 hours working 100 yards of water. It's a deep shelf, really good looking water, the kind of place that you would spend that amount of time working. But it wasn't until I caught my seventh whitefish, probably our 12th or 13th overall from that spot, that I looked at Alex and I was like, hey, I think we found where the whitefish are. Probably not going to find any more trout here, though. So if we want to catch more trout today, we should probably move on. And again, I said that after like 2 hours of fishing. 2025 Spencer would have said that after like 20 minutes. Be like, there are no trout here. We're going to keep moving. So I think I'm making some progress personally. But again, I caught tons of fish from that run, including one whitefish that went almost 20 inches, which is a great size for whitefish. So, and it was honestly fun to work the water that hard. I enjoyed picking it apart and really trying to dial in my presentation, get the flies in front of where I thought the fish would be. We caught a bunch. And then, we did realize after a couple hours, okay, there's probably not very many trout here. If we want to catch some bigger trout, we should probably move on. And then we did. But the other side of this too is that I also see that the anglers who patiently work the water thoroughly are the ones that I see having the most success. There's this one guy I fish with. He just fishes hard. He doesn't take too many breaks. He's always got his fly in the water, and he's very thorough before he moves on. And he just consistently catches more fish than I do when we fish together. And it's really just because he fishes harder than I do. And he's been an inspiration to me to honestly quit being so impatient and just expecting the fish to cooperate with me sometimes. Especially, if I don't get a fish on the first few drifts, I'm like, oh, there's no fish here, and move on. I'm really trying to reframe that and force myself to follow this guy's example, right? You got to be willing to put in a fair amount of work. And unfortunately, I got away from that largely last year. I'm really trying to change that this year. So that's my 2 cents. Be patient, work the water hard. Don't leave feeling like you could have done more or could have done something differently. Okay, leave it all out there in the river. Consistently push yourself to cover as much water as you can and do it as thoroughly as you can. I think that's going to be your best skill that you can develop as an angler moving forward. So hopefully that answers the question, Kevin. Appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who sent questions in this week. Love hearing from y'all. They shape the show, even if I don't read them here on air. I read every single question that comes in, and they shape what we talk about every week. So do not stop sending those questions in. We need them. Keep them coming. But we are going to end the show now with our Live Real Life moment, what we do every week, where we get the chance to read a story, share a picture from folks out there in the VFC audience who are living real life. We love to see what y'all are up to. We love to see your adventures. So if you've got a Live Real Life moment you would like to share, there's a link to send those in down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. And this week's Live Real Life moment is from Quentin, who writes in and says, "Hello, I'm a senior in high school and a long-tenured listener of the Untangled podcast. I'm a new fly angler who recently switched over from conventional fishing at the beginning of last summer. I fly fished for around 2 years, but finally committed to fly fishing only. I quickly became obsessed, spending about 5 to 6 days a week on the water over the summer, and I plan to do the same this summer. I was out with my fly fishing buddy on a river we know was stocked with brookies, rainbows, and browns, but we mostly catch smallmouth bass. The water was fast and high, and we had no luck at all for the first 3 hours. We were getting ready to leave when my buddy threw one last cast out in a slow, shallow pocket right by the shore. He was talking to me when I saw a 15 to 16 inch rainbow chase his streamer. We quickly settled into this hole and fished for hours with many strikes and no fish. I finally hooked into a small brookie that snapped my line due to a poorly tied knot. Defeated, I made my last cast before packing up. While stripping slowly across the bottom of the pool, I saw a small brook trout inhale my large pink streamer. This is the picture of my first trout this year. Thanks to the many podcasts and specifically the brook trout episode, I knew the brook trout are extremely aggressive, and that helped me land this fish. But more importantly, I've learned to love the challenge and the experiences I get to have with my buddy. Quentin, I love it. That's live real life, man. And that dovetails so well with Kevin's question too about work the water, be consistent, don't give up, really put the effort in, and then having the time with your buddy. There's not much else like it out there. So congrats, and thanks for sharing the story. Appreciate it. And with that, folks, we're going to wrap the show up this week. Thank you all for listening, watching to the show to the very end. Helps us out more than you know. If you want to help us out even more, tell everybody about VFC, tell them about Untangled, join school, come hang out with us as much as you possibly can, and make sure you rate and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening to it as well. The more ratings and subscriptions we get, the more folks we can help live real life, which is the whole goal for what we're doing here at VFC. And until next week, everybody, get out on the water, enjoy yourselves, go catch some fish, and live real life.